Welcome to the Chamber of Mazamol, Balin's tomb. In this episode, I'll show you how I went from foam to final diorama. Let's begin. We begin here. We'll be using wood for the floor and we'll be using polystyrene for all the stonework, along with clay for the textured walls. As recommended in issue 21 of Battle Games in Middle-earth, I cut the wooden base, which is actually the bottom of an IKEA wardrobe, into a 2 foot by 2 foot square. We need walls around the edges of the board. For those walls and the second level, I use some cheap expanded polystyrene, which I cut to size on the hot wire cutter. This stuff is cheaper than XPS foam and it's nice and light. The main thing I hate with this stuff is that the little balls of polystyrene get everywhere. Balin's tomb is located inside the Chamber of Mazamol, also known as the Chamber of Records. So I modelled up these bookcases to go around the chamber. 3 larger ones for the top level, 6 smaller ones for the bottom level to go in between all the pillars. I mark out the spaces for the bookcases and using combinations of handheld wire cutters and a sharp craft knife, I cut out all the gaps and test fit to make sure it goes together nicely. Once I had one side of the board ready, I applied some texture to the walls. I've created a texture roller, the bottom half of which was dwarven writing and the top half a simple stone texture. For the dwarven writing, I took all the names of my patrons past and present and turned them into dwarven runes. Those were added to my texture roller, and when I pressed down nice and slow, it left a really nice repeating texture of all the names, now immortalised in the Chamber of Records. There was a lot of waiting for things to dry in this build. Once the clay dried, I marked out where I wanted the columns to go and the bookcases for the lower level. The spaces were cut out. In the movies, there was a hole smashed through the wall that serves as an exit for the Fellowship. So I added that by simply destroying part of the walls. And everything was stuck down to the base. I create a simple shape for the main entrance by cutting out different sized door frames and sticking those pieces together. 2 great pillars flank the chamber, wrapped in ancient stonework. Here's how I brought them to life. I used more expanded polystyrene as the frame, and along the bottom I cut some thin XPS foam. The texture roller we used earlier created amazing imprints and worked far better than I expected. I'll probably use this technique again. I 3D printed some decorative dwarven stone banding to wrap around the pillar, inspired by Moria's iconic architecture. The design added depth and realism, breaking up the carved runes. All of those were glued onto the pillars. With the majority of the framework in place, I moved on to adding a more natural texture. I wanted something that would pick up nicely in the painting stage, so I watered down some sculptor mould and placed this all over the model. I also covered the outside as I wanted this to look like a completed piece. Once that dried, which took days and days, I went back through and glued on more of that decorative stonework. Then it was time to fit the bookcases and pillars in place. An unforeseen part of this was that the sculptor mould had filled in a little where I had cut previously, so I had to go around and dig out extra space before everything would fit together. With the spaces now big enough, they were glued into place and I filled any gaps with some texture paste. We could now move on to the painting stage. This thing is remarkably light. I carried the whole thing down from my loft into the garden and gave it a coat of black spray paint. Once that dried, I carried it back upstairs and I picked out all the details with a light grey dry brush. I still get a buzz every time I dry brush my terrain like this. It just suddenly shows all the details and textures that we've been adding so far. I was so pleased at this stage, it looked just so good. But it was very grey and cold, so it was time for some washes to layer up the details. I took some inks, skin, blue and yellow, and really watered them down, then started randomly placing them around the model, letting them run and pool. I did a number of stages of this until I was happy with the look. I wanted to push the shadows and depth of the diorama, so I took some black pigment powder and added it to all the edges. This is known as ambient shadowing, and it helps simulate the way natural light falls off in crevices and corners, giving the piece a more realistic and visually striking sense of depth. With a little spritz of isopropyl alcohol, that locks it all down in place. There were some areas of the paintwork after the washes that left a shine. I removed those with an all-over covering of matte varnish. With the paintwork done, it was time to move on to the finishing details. I created some books and scrolls for the bookcases. To do this, I cut various sizes of foam, and using a spare bookcase, I put them all inside and painted them up in a few different colours. To add a little extra detail, I added some gold banding to some of the books and finished with a wash of Agrax Earthshade to give an old, worn look. I also 3D printed a few little open books. These got a thick coat of skeleton horde, and I printed some sheets of tiny dwarven and elven poems from the books. I picked one and cut out a tiny part to fit onto the pages. I made sure to wet the paper. This helps relax it a little and make it easier to conform to the new shape. A little glue held it in place and a knife cut it, creating 2 pages. For some scrolls, I used a tissue type paper I bought years ago with no real idea what I would use it for, but I really liked the look. I cut out a few strips and once rolled up they made perfect little scrolls. Then I picked a bookshelf and started placing books until I was happy with the look. I watered down some PVA and stuck them in place. Next, going around the whole board and filling up all the bookcases. Right, we're nearly there, just a few more details. I created a well, a tomb and some weapon racks. Nothing too complicated. I created a base for the well, did a simple paint job for all the pieces and glued them onto the board. And we were completed and ready to play. I've been waiting a long time to build this and I really enjoyed the whole process. Doing a build like this really forces you to think and test different techniques. I highly recommend tackling a big build like this. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and until next time, happy modelling.